Remember Arkanoid? Well, Wizkid is that, but with a bunch of crazy ideas thrown in, ideas that came from Sensible Software's drawing board. It was the developers' way of expressing themselves creatively, artistically and madly. We don't see this kind of effort anymore, no one wants to take risks. But Wizkid is the proof that risks could pay off and that there are so many gaming genres yet to be discovered. It plays like a dream with the Maverick one. Remember the incredible Green Beret? Fire Force can be seen as a sort of spiritual successor that offers everything that fans of, let's say, the original ever wanted, including awesome weapons, hostages, helicopters, medals, terrorists, etc. It obviously drank huge amounts of influence in Vietnam movies from the 80s, and we can see that cinematic influence when, for instance, we blew up a watchtower with an anti-tank weapon, Rambo style. And talking about Rambo, a knife can be also used to silently take down the bad guys, and a helicopter awaits us at the end of the very first level, just like in so many action-packed and Vietnam War-themed movies from that era. The only downside of Fire Force is really the AI of the enemies, but even so, it's a freaking amazing gem, not only on the Amiga, but also on the Atari ST. Qwak is a cute platformer designed by Jamie Woodhouse and initially released in '89 for the BBC Micro and the Acorn Electron. 4 years later, by 1993, was given a special treatment and was updated and enhanced for the good old Commodore Amiga, being also available later that year for the CD32. It features ducks who throw eggs at their opponents. It's a pretty common concept by that time, and it manages to get everything just right, something that many couldn't simply achieve. Each level is composed of one single screen in size, but the compact graphics manage to pack in a lot of detail. The goal is to collect keys, avoiding enemies and escape through the exit. A second player can join in and toss his own eggs. It was sold as a mid-range title, but it was way superior to many full-priced games that would cost twice as much. A couple of decades later, was ported to the Game Boy Advance, and there are also Mac, Windows and iOS versions available. Deliverance is a sequel to Stormlord and was originally intended to be a straight port from the C64 version. But the developers had something special in store for the Amiga game, which involved larger levels, massive sprites and incredibly detailed graphics, similar to what we could find in Gods from the Bitmap brothers. It's nothing more than a hack-and-slash action platformer in where we control this mighty warrior known as the Stormlord, fighting his way through these levels, killing weird monsters, bats and spiders crawling up the walls and along the ceilings. But if you thought that this would be a hack-and-slash platformer from beginning to end, wait till you reach the later levels. Scrolling shoot-em-up fans, rejoice! I know that Mean Machine is not a very good game, but when I was younger, I was awfully attracted to it, mainly because of its intense action and thrilling rides. The sad side is that it's really short. Gladly, a couple of years later, Micro Machines came out, again with the help from Codemasters. Played this last one on DOS, and was because of Mean Machine that I fell in love with this subgenre. Highly playable using the Maverick one. Bullfrog is normally associated with names like Populous, Syndicate, Powermonger and Theme Park, but from Peter Molyneux's company also came by 1990 Flood, this curious platform game that also saw a simultaneous Atari ST release. Bullfrog tried something different with this one, experimenting new gameplay styles, also featuring a peculiar sense of humor. We control a character named Quiffy, who lives underground in a series of sewers and tunnels. But the game is named Flood, cause water rises, filling the levels and eventually causing Quiffy to drown. The aim is to collect pieces of rubbish and escape. That's it! But being labeled as platformer, our character can climb up walls and across ceilings as well as leaping about. As you've probably already noticed, there are a selection of weapons available that includes a flamethrower, a boomerang, a shuriken, dynamite and even grenades, which can be used to fight a strange array of enemies. A mysterious ghost follows our exact path and must be avoided at all costs. It all adds up to a slightly bizarre game with an unmissable end sequence that I won't be showing here. Play it, you'll be amazed. With only 8 levels, Fly Harder is challenging enough to last more than you think. The goal is to safely guide energy spheres across the map to overload reactors. For that, we control a spaceship that is constantly being affected by gravity. As you might imagine, controlling the ship is a true challenge, so imagine when one of those spheres is attached. Its inertia will bring an even greater challenge. Keyboard control remapping was common on 8-bit home computers like the ZX Spectrum, but on the Amiga was quite an unusual feature. And a year later, there was also a CD32 edition, but just like practically all releases for that console, the CD version differs little from the floppy release. If you've played Uridium and Paradroid back in the 8-bit glory days of home computing, you're obviously familiar with GraphGold's amazing work, so it was with no surprise that the 16-bit technology would be a gift from the gods for such a talented developer. Their Amiga catalog would include games like Fire and Ice and Rainbow Islands, but there was this one gem that would pass under the radar for many players, mainly because it arrived a bit late by 1995, by a time when few were still playing around with the system. Virocop was supposed to be a sort of shoot-em-up with tanks, but rapidly evolved to a virtual world in where we take control of Dave, our digital armored virus exterminator that floats around these maze-like levels destroying viruses. And as a side note, this Dave unit was based on GraphGold's own KLP2 that appeared in their Spectrum game Quasitron. Remember that one? It was initially developed for the Amiga 500, but there was also an enhanced AGA version for the Amiga 1200, which included a whole new world. It was GraphGold's final and exclusive game for the Amiga. The Amiga had a couple of good FPSs, and one of those was, and still is, Breathless. Again, exclusive to AGA machines. It was developed by an Italian studio known as Fields of Vision that, if I'm not mistaken, was their own and only game ever to be published. Can't comprehend why, cause Breathless is so amazing. Probably the fact of being an Amiga exclusive was what really killed it, along with the team behind its development. Also, being released in 1995 among so many other incredible first-person shooters was a complete adventure and a shot in the dark for an unknown studio. But even having such an overwhelming reception from the press wasn't enough to convince Amiga users and gamers in general. By then, the Amiga was seen by many as a dying system without a sustainable future, so there wasn't any compelling reason to continue to invest on the platform. Sadly. But let me tell you this, Breathless is one of the greatest achievements from that era, that's a fact. And to conclude, a game that I played firstly on DOS. Stardust came from a Finnish developer, Bloodhouse, and despite high review scores for the Amiga version, it wasn't a big success. I've discovered the Amiga version back in 1994. It was an announced AGA sequel to the original, named Super Stardust, that was also ported to the PC under the title Super Stardust 96, and over 10 years later, the PlayStation 3 and the PSP also got their own enhanced remake, Super Stardust HD, later also spawning another sequel, Super Stardust Delta, exclusively for the Vita. With all these ports and sequels, the original must be fairly good, right? It's nothing more than a clone of Asteroids, with power-ups, shields, bosses, an amazing techno module soundtrack, and ray-traced graphics. There are even thrust-style levels, where the ship must navigate caverns. The most impressive and memorable section is seen in the tunnel sequences. The ship flies into the screen, avoiding incoming obstacles in this spectacular frenetic action.